We've been talking about how Max is actually the secret deep character. Snake Pliskin's not a deep character. He is there to be cool.
There's a self-aware nature to this movie, but I know, well, John Carpenter, you can't hide it from me. You thought Snake was the coolest character ever.
You realized Snake was the coolest character ever.
Welcome to Film Fights, where we don't just talk about movies, we make them fight. Today, continuing our 80s action tournament bracket, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior versus Escape from New York. If you guys want to check out our other episodes, I have the link right up here in this corner. Let us know down below in the comment section which movie you prefer. Now, let's get into Mad Max 2 versus Escape from New York. Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, directed by George Miller and released in 1981, is a post-apocalyptic action film that continues the saga of Max Rokitansky, portrayed by Mel Gibson. As a sequel to the original Mad Max, the film deepens the dystopian narrative, presenting Max as a loner navigating a desolate Australian wasteland. In this harsh environment, Max becomes entangled in a conflict between a group of settlers and a band of marauders led by the fearsome Lord Humongous.
You couldn't say it without...
Lord Humongous.
This professional thing. It's like, by the evil Lord Humongous.
My name is Lord Humongous.
Lord Among Us.
Written by George Miller, Terry Hayes, and Brian Hannett, the film is celebrated for its high-speed chases and innovative action sequences, all set against a backdrop of societal collapse and survival. Mad Max 2 is not only a cornerstone of the action genre, but also a significant influence on the depiction of post-apocalyptic futures in cinema. Escape from New York, directed by John Carpenter and released in 1981, is a dystopian action film set in a future where Manhattan has been converted into a colossal maximum security prison. The film's story, written by John Carpenter and Nick Castle, unfolds as the U.S. president's plane crashes into the island prison, and the government recruits the cynical and rebellious ex-soldier Snake Pliskin, portrayed by Kurt Russell, to rescue him. Under the threat of death if he fails, Snake must navigate the dangerous, anarchic cityscape, encountering a myriad of treacherous criminals and obstacles. Known for its dark, atmospheric setting and innovative plot, Escape from New York has become a cult classic, celebrated for its pioneering approach to action in science fiction genres. For round one, we have narrative and pacing, which can earn up to 10 points from each of us.
What do we think about the narrative and pacing of Mad Maxwell 2,
so this
Road
is
Warrior?
This is a tricky one. Because I know that both of these movies, now looking into it, are beloved. I do have problems with these movies that do hinder its quality. However, I would say I like both of these movies, and I think they're both good at the end of the day, and I understand how innovative they are. Now, my wishy-washy disclaimers out of the way, let me get into Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. The narrative is very simple. The opening scene, exposition scene, I think it sets the tone for the movie really well. I think it's really cool. Max is trying to survive. Max comes upon a settlement that is being attacked by these marauders, these gangsters. Max decides to help them at the end, but he's at first just motivated for himself, right? That is your general story. He helps them escape at the end. The narrative is not the strong point here. I think it's the world building around it, the atmosphere around it, which adds to the flavor of this movie. But I wouldn't attribute that in the narrative and pacing section.
It's got a similar structure to things like Magnificent Seven. Well, instead of 7 people, it's just one guy and the gyro captain, but it's a similar thing of just, they come across the village attacked by bandits, and they help the village do the missions and fight the guys at the end. Yeah,
I think it works for what it's trying to do. Not going to win any screenwriting Oscars here, but I think, especially, that's not much talking to begin with.
Mel Gibson had a nice 19 lines in the movie.
19.
Main character, by the way. He's not a side character. He's Mad Max.
Didn't like talking to him. It's just that overall, it's not a super strong narrative, but most of what I could say is going to be applied to other things of why it's not building a good narrative. But it does have a couple of good things. I like the trick at the end with the tanker. That was pretty neat. And there's a couple of other good things that it does. Just plot-wise, some interesting little details and tricks that it does. It's just that overall it doesn't build a very strong story, I think.
To regurgitate what you said just a little bit, I think the coolest plot twist-ish in the movie is when you find out that the truck Max has been driving this whole time was just a diversion filled with sand. And it's like the only time you see Max smile in the whole movie, like, these guys.
I got him good. But yeah, it's things like that, and like his car being rigged plays with that pretty good.
I think where it suffers more than the narrative itself, which is simple but effective, is the pacing. While I don't think it's terrible, in fact, I think it's a significant improvement from the first Mad Max, there's just a lot of scenes that feel slow, which is surprising because the movie's an hour and 30 minutes long. It's not like a long movie, but it still feels slow. The one scene that the Fob and I have been discussing is when he is just camping out, watching the base. That scene felt like it went on for an eternity. And whether it did or not, maybe it was only a minute, maybe it was 5 or 10. I'm not sure.
Hyperbolic time chamber of the scene.
It just felt really long, and like I didn't need all the information that they were trying to give me. Whether it's Max is just studying the patterns or something else, or it's just trying to give the audience a look at as to what's going on. He ends up just saving some guy anyways to get into the base, so it's not like he was analyzing it to sneak in and steal the gas.
That's a good point. I didn't hate that scene just because I've grown to like scenes where the main character is kind of studying things, because it goes to show that the main character is smart. I mean, we do like the Batman where one of the opening scenes is just him walking around saying nothing, looking at the crime scene. But like you said, it could have been cut down a little bit and there could have been more purpose added to it. It's just that I didn't immediately hate it.
As cool as the action is in this movie, I feel like there could have been 1 or 2 more action scenes in between to really spice things up, or at least cement Max as like a total bad. I feel like we could have just used 1 or 2 more to make it feel more better paced, I'll say. Escape from New York. Well, first off, I just want to say this movie is directed by John Carpenter. I love John Carpenter's work, his style, both narratively, visually, but right now we're going to stick with the narrative. John Carpenter is really good at taking very simple concepts and fleshing it out into a full movie that realistically this movie could be a short film with its premise, but he found a way to make it a feature-length film and not have it be boring. It's basically just New York, due to the incompetence of the government, is now become a maximum security prison because crime has risen up so much. And also due to the incompetence of the government, the president somehow winds up in this maximum security prison that no one can really get into. They have to take this fugitive of the law, Snake Pliskin, to rescue him. Once again, this government is corrupt, and we'll get more into that in themes. They basically say, hey, we're going to freaking kill you with these injections in 24 hours unless you can make it back out with the president. And that's your basic plot. You meet some characters along the way. You get a sense of who Snake Pliskin is. Kind of like Mad Max, it's pretty simple, but at the end of the day, there's good twists and turns, and I attribute that to characters. I attribute that to set pieces. I think despite the movie being so simple, it is well paced.
What I like about this narrative is that on the face of it, right, it's just the fun 80s action movie, and I think it actually succeeds at that very well. Has a lot of fun action set pieces, main character super cool, and you know, it gives that vibe off well. But I think what I especially liked, it has good world building, I think. It develops how New York has changed very well, because he goes into a theater and he sees just how everyone has gone crazy and they're putting on these plays and everyone's just in the madhouse and they don't realize it. Or maybe they do and they've
embraced it.
They've embraced the crazy. They don't bat an eye at this guy Snake Pliskin going around carrying a gun. Everyone just kind of goes along with it, but I think it's fun because it adds to the world, you know?
As you said, they really flesh out this world. It makes sense why the brain is an important character. He's smart and he knows where to find oil and gasoline, and those are very important resources in this sort of abandoned city.
It's pretty consistent. He becomes smart throughout the movie. His plan develops.
There's just little things like that throughout Escape from from New York. It doesn't try to do anything too overt or grandiose, but it doesn't really have to. I would say the narrative is pretty much as strong as Mad Max 2, if not stronger. The pacing is definitely better.
Yeah.
I think...
I mean, every scene's pretty engaging, and it doesn't take up too much of your time. Not any more than it needs to.
Exactly.
Across the board.
Let's get into scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
Mad Max 2, 5 out of 10. So my reasoning is, I think the narrative is actually slightly above average in my opinion, but then I think the pacing is below average, so it kind of balances out to a 5.
I'm going to give Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior a 6 out of 10. I agree with you, almost exactly what you say. I just think it brings it to a 6 to me as opposed to a 5.
I gave The Road Warrior a 5 out of 10. The pacing really hurts this one, and it kind of cripples some enjoyment of the movie, but I think there's some things in narrative and how other aspects tie into the narrative that we'll get into later really help. Now we'll score Escape from New York.
For narrative and pacing, I'm giving Escape from New York a 7 out of 10. The pacing was solid, and the narrative was pretty enjoyable.
I am giving Escape from New York a 6.5 out of 10. I think that the narrative is ultimately very shallow, but so is The Road Warrior, where it gets the leg up as a pacing, but not enough to reach a 7.
I'm giving Escape from New York a 7 out of 10 on narrative and pacing, because the pacing is very good. It helps to make the movie feel energetic, and while the narrative kind of doesn't exist, I was gonna give it a 6, but I think it doesn't hurt the movie that much that it has a weak narrative. I think it still fulfills what it is pretty well, so it doesn't suffer from it too much.
For round 2, we have characters and acting, which can earn up to 5 points from each of us. The characters in The Road Warrior are not that great.
Ooh.
What?
How dare you?
I know.
I actually disagree with that.
Okay. All
I think
right.
you're forgetting about the gyro captain.
Well, that's one thing I do want to say. Before we talk about Max, this is weird to go to the side characters, but I do have to say the gyro captain is the MVP of The Road Warrior. He's
a real one.
He's a real one. He's a true friend, even though Max is kind of an a-hole. The recurring gag where Max keeps abandoning him and he keeps coming back to help him anyway is really not only funny, but it just makes him an endearing character. And it's so great that at the end he gets to be the leader of the tribe or the settlement or whatever it is, and he gets the pretty girl. He's just such a likable character that's got a real fun energy. He invested me.
Yeah, it was like, I didn't expect him to be a main character at the start. I thought it was just some guy Max kills, but...
When it comes to Max, and the fob's about to throw some hands at me, it seems, but I just didn't think that he was interesting, unfortunately. He really is just this passive character drifting on, and I know that that implies things about Max, but as a proxy, I just wasn't interested in him.
Well, sometimes silence speaks volumes, and Max's silence does not speak volumes. It's like there's something that should be said here, and he's just not saying anything.
Yeah.
Even if it was just like one word or 2 words, like a cool line, it would help. But most of the time, it's because in his position, his character doesn't have anything interesting to say.
He doesn't have any goals. He doesn't have any goals by the end of it.
He's also not different by the end of this movie.
No, it's like he doesn't change. He doesn't say much. Max didn't do it for me. I wasn't annoyed by him. This could all be secretly deep and amazing, and I'm just missing something, and there's a disconnect. At the same time, it is something that I do have to point out.
With Max, you have to realize that he doesn't really feel like he fits in with anything. He's kind of just a lone wanderer, right? He is alone. He doesn't have anybody or anything. All he has is his dog, and he doesn't want to lose anybody anymore. Like, that's why he's constantly rejects the gyro captain trying to make a team with him. This is why he really tries to distance himself away from the settlement. He doesn't want to get too attached.
He doesn't want to feel responsible when things eventually hit the fan.
Yeah, so basically the only time he ever even shows anger or like he ever really shows emotion is when Papagallo is taunting him and being like, "Oh, you're probably not helping us because you had family, friends that died." And that's when he finally is like, well, you can talk bad about me all you want. Once he starts talking about his fans, his family, his friends, that's when he finally steps up.
I think you make some good points. At the end of the day, it's just one of those things where, yes, he did go through these tragedies. Yes, he did that, but I just feel like it felt very unexplored. But it would be something that is worth me looking at on a rewatch, to be fair. We have to talk about Lord Humongous. I thought as a villain, he worked like decently fine. Even though we make fun of the look he has, I do at the end of the day like it. It felt very medieval in a lot of ways, not a whole lot of clothing. He's wearing a helmet that is reminiscent of a hockey mask, but it almost looks reminiscent of also like old armor from the Middle Ages. I think he has good screen presence. A lot of his decisions don't make sense, but at the end of the day, it's a feral world. Wes from The Road Warrior, played by Vernon Wells, aka Bennett from Commando. It was good seeing him back because he brought this real crazed energy. He brought that feral energy from the villains to show just how humanity sort of devolved.
He has Bennett energy.
Yeah.
There's a new Bennett archetype in movies.
Vernon Wells
This
created...
weird villain that doesn't make sense.
I always like to see him. I always like to see this guy. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for Vernon Wells if he's in any more movies in this tournament, because that would make me so happy. I like the feral kid because he's the only person in the movie that really seems to bring out the humanity in Max. While the feral kid's nothing crazy. I mean, he does have a boomerang that
He's
he
actually
kills.
quite crazy.
Yes, it's true. He is crazy. And I do like that he kills that one guy with the boomerang. It was just so out of pocket and out of nowhere. It was super funny. And then he cuts off that one guy's fingers. Just like Vernon Wells as Wes brought a sort of crazed energy to the bad guys, I think the feral kid brought a feral energy to the good guy's side while also being somewhat endearing. And the dog. I like the dog.
And the feral kid's also the narrator.
Yeah, if Max didn't save him, there'd be nobody to tell the story.
It'd be game, set, match.
So I think the Pappagallo is actually one of the best characters. And he's also a really good parallel to Humongous. I think Pappagallo is a good representation of like the perfect leader. Like he clearly cares a lot about his settlers, and basically everything he does is for the good of the camp, which is also kind of an opposite of Max, who does everything for the good of himself. Pappagallo does everything for the good of his people.
Well, and just to hop in real quick, they're also wearing the exact opposite colors, which is another good way to illustrate that contrast in character traits.
The clothing represents the characters really well in every character, basically, especially on the bad guys. The Pappagallo, he puts on some of the best performances, I'd say, like when he was going off on Max. He's clearly very emotional. He needed Max to drive that truck, to be honest. But then even when Max is like, no, I'm not doing it, one of his underlings was like, or settlers was like, yo, since he's not going to do it, we're not going to let him get away with the car, right? And he's like, no, we had a deal. He can take the car. He can leave. He also has a lot of principles in that sense. And one more thing, then he's like, well, who's going to drive the tanker? And he's like, I'll do it myself. Now, with prior post knowledge, we know the tanker's like a distraction, dangerous, and probably going to get killed.
It's a suicide mission.
It's basically a suicide mission.
He's just weird because you would say that he has like some sense of honor by trying to honor his deal with Max, but at the beginning he does the exact opposite, where he said that I had to deal with this guy, and he says your contract died with him. It's like, we're not going to help you, and he tries to kill him only until Max can help them, which he was already doing. I think a lot of the decisions that were made to carry on the plot kind of conflict with his character, if that's the idea. I think the more interesting dynamic is that he's the one who talks a lot without really saying much of substance compared to Max, who I think the idea is that he doesn't talk a lot because not much to say, he speaks in his actions. But
yeah,
either way, I think I wasn't particularly moved by any of these dynamics.
You can also, he's kind of a parallel to Humongous, who, while he seems to care about his underlings, at the end of the day, he's a scavenger. Someone on his team dies, he'll like everyone will just start laughing, and he'll just be participating because at the end of the day, he doesn't really care.
He's just a strong guy that people follow.
He's not civilized, really.
Yeah, he's like an animal.
Well, then that also just contrasts with scenes where he's trying to talk with, is it Wes? He tries to have a heart-to-heart with Wes.
Tries to like be like, yo, I know your pain. We've all lost someone.
We were saying it was weird that everyone was laughing and then he tried to be emotional about it.
I think that might go into a more manipulative aspect of his character where he's really trying to shape people into thinking a certain way about him.
I guess I'll just hop in on this little squabble here. I'm actually more on the fob side of this one. For one, this is a crazed world where a lot of different things are happening. People do make decisions that like conflict, but at the beginning, he doesn't know Max. He has no reason to believe that this guy promised Max anything. And at the end of the day, if his main priority is the good of the people, that's all he's going to care about. As he gets to know Max more, he sees the potential in him, and when Max continually rejects that potential, it's why he gets upset at times and seems to conflict with himself. But at the end of the day, he does honor his deal once he knows Max more as a person. A lot of his decisions can make sense in a way that's not too contradictory. Where I don't disagree, I don't know about the contrast between him and Humongous. That's where I'm more with Kyle, where I'm like...
Well, it's like, that is kind of sketchy, but I think it's sort of, for me, it's because
the connection,
Humongous doesn't care about his people at all.
I think that it's a little bit more of a surface level connection for me, where it's kind of like, even if they were planning that, it didn't feel like it, and I don't really see it as much. It's more like Humongous is kind of like the guy, and the angle I would take about that is the contrast between Humongous and the Papagallo is that they're really not that different. Whether you're settlers or feral, this whole world's kind of gone to... The interesting thing is that Goose from the first movie was going to end up being Lord Humongous. I think that is just such a missed opportunity, because not only could you contrast him with, you know, the Papagallo, some side character, you could contrast him with Max and how Max and him have sort of progressed in different ways, and just showing how this world has really deteriorated things. Lost potential, for sure. Would have been so cool. Alas, was not meant to be. I guess we could move on to Escape from New York's characters. We got to talk about Snake Pliskin. Between the two protagonists,
Snake,
yes, who doesn't remind me at all of Solid Snake from the Metal Gear Solid.
Not at all.
Colonel, I'm trying to sneak around, but I'm dummy thick.
We've been talking about how Max is actually the secret deep character. Snake Plissken's not a deep character. He is there to be cool.
I am very conflicted on the character of Snake Pliskin. I heard someone say that some people exude this cool energy when they're on screen. Think of Darth Vader. Whenever he's on screen, he's just so cool, and he has this commanding presence. And then there's people who just try to act cool. And
yeah, he's a total poser.
Yes.
That's why I like him.
It's Snake Pliskin. The movie is trying to sell you that Snake Pliskin is the coolest guy ever. Whether it's Kurt Russell's performance or something else, or the way they write the character, I, in the modern day of 2024, just don't buy it at all. So he's not a deep character. He's an entertaining character.
Yes.
I give him that. Very entertaining. I don't buy him as a cool guy.
Okay.
I don't buy him as this military bad. I don't buy him in anything.
I gotta say, though, the movie does explain him as a poser because nobody is impressed with him at all, except like people who don't have that much intuition.
I will say that is my favorite recurring gag in the movie, though, where everyone knows who he is.
Everyone knows who Snake Pliskin is.
And they're like, says, I thought you were dead.
I thought you were dead.
John Carpenter wrote the script in like 73, 74. And everyone's like, that's too dark. It's too anti-government. No one's going to want to make this movie. And then once he sort of...
right.
And then as soon as the 80s hit, you know, the whole Richard Nixon thing happens with Watergate, and proven himself as a very successful independent filmmaker with Halloween. They're like, hey, we're going to let you make the movie now, because he wanted to make it. And Nick Castle, who also plays Michael Myers in Halloween, he ends up helping him rewrite the script. All of the humor, apparently, in the movie is thanks to Nick Castle adding humor into the movie.
Good job, Nick. You
because
saved this one.
If he didn't make the characters funny...
would have been awful.
Would have sucked.
It would have just been boring the whole time.
There's a self-aware nature to this movie, which is why I'm going to give Snake Pliskin a pass. But I know, well, John Carpenter, you can't hide it from me. You thought Snake was the coolest character ever.
You realized Snake was the coolest character ever.
He knew he was the coolest character. And thank God for Nick Castle being like, We're going to give him a
Total
hint of
poser.
goober. Exactly.
He's just a nobody, really.
Nick Castle saved this movie. Saved it single-handedly.
That's all I have to say about Snake Pliskin. He just gets lucky at every opportunity, really.
Like I said, I'm in between him being cool, kind of like Indiana Jones, but it doesn't feel as self-aware as Indiana Jones to me. You sense the self-awareness where I do not.
I definitely do.
I like it in more of an ironic way. He sounds like he's impersonating Shadow the Hedgehog.
You've got to be kidding me, guys. This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
I don't give a about your war or your president.
Snake Pliskin, I think he is cool, not you, unlike you. I think landing a jet on top of the Empire State Building is pretty cool.
Right now, we have 3 different perspectives on who Snake Plissken is. We have one where he's actually cool. Me is, he's not actually cool, and I don't think John Carpenter realizes that. And you saying he's kind of a poser, but it was totally intentional.
Absolutely.
The 3 perspectives on Snake Plissken. Either way, we all enjoy him, so that's a good thing. I'll say that much.
Yeah, this. Let us know in the comments what you think about Snake Pliskin.
Is he a poser? Is he cool? Or is he low-key a moron? Who knows?
None of the other characters are very deep. The Duke is just this boss of New York. I guess he works.
He's Chef
similar
though from
role.
South Park.
He is Chef. Hey, children, I'm taking over New York.
Yes, shout out Isaac Hayes. He's okay, but he doesn't have the larger-than-life persona that I feel like he needs to fulfill in order to maximize the potential of the character in the movie.
I suppose so. He doesn't have a lot of screen presence, but I at least like all his decisions in the movie. It makes sense.
The cab driver, I also think, he's got that over-the-top fun nature where I'm like...
He's like a gyro captain character.
He's not quite as good as a gyro captain, but he's still kind of fun. I like the brain as sort of this, like, you never know what he's thinking. Is he going to betray Snake? Is he going to betray the Duke?
I do like in his first encounter with Snake where he's very good at not showing his hand.
And I like that a lot. He's got a great poker face. Donald Pleasance as the president of the United States of America.
That's right.
That guy was great. He is a buffoon. Once again, John Carpenter showing his hatred of authority. Basically
John Carpenter might be an anarchist.
Yes. He basically made it known that he hates the president, and I'm making him this idiot. And Donald Pleasance plays this idiot that you could understand can posture as an intellectual, just the way he sounds. But when you actually see him, he's a moron. So
he's a bumbling buffoon.
Yeah, I like him. Lee Van Cleef, great to see him back from the spaghetti westerns as this sort of hardened guy sending Snake on this mission. Every time it chimes back to him, it's great. He, I would say, is the character that has like the second most screen presence outside of Snake. Mm-hmm. When he talks, he's just got a commanding way about him that I really appreciate. Other than that, though, none of these characters are particularly deep, including our beloved Snake Pliskin. Characters have energy when they're there, but it's not the movie's strong suit. Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
All right, so for Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, I have a 4 out of 5 for characters. I think, like, most of them are actually strong, apparently contrary to belief in this podcast group, but hey, whatever.
I am going to give Mad Max 2 a 3 out of 5. I'm not buying the hype like the fob, as he mentioned, but he did change my mind on a couple things that I will bring it up from my planned 2.5 to a 3.
I will give The Road Warrior a 2 on characters. I think I like the gyro captain, but other than that, I wasn't impressed by character writing or acting.
Let's get into scoring for Escape from New York. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5. I think it was just really average for characters.
I am giving Escape from New York a 3. In my heart, it's a 2.5, but I just found Snake Pliskin so entertaining. I had to give it a 3.
I will give Escape from New York a 3 on characters and acting. The performances were very good across the board, and the characters filled their roles swimmingly. although they were not particularly deep.
Let's get to round 3, action sequences and choreography, which can earn up to 15 whole points from each of us. Mad Max 2, what it has is great action, just not a whole lot of it.
Are there just 3 action scenes?
So there's the one at the beginning, there's the one in the middle, but the middle one is a long one. It is a very lengthy action scene. And then there's the one at the end, which is also a very long one. But I will say this, the scenes in the movie, they're very high energy. They're a lot of fun. There's a lot of great shots, which will be in the next section more. But getting into the specifics, there's really 2 big action scenes. It's that aforementioned one in the middle, which is great, of Max driving the truck, driving through things, people coming to support him getting it into the compound. A lot of fun, a lot of good moments there. The final one, also really high energy, also a lot of fun. Ups and downs where their people start dying off, the bandits start dying off. It's really good back and forth, whereas the villains are starting to triumph, then the good guys gain something. But they always feel like they're on a little bit of a losing streak. Until randomly the Papa Gallo is like, yeah, you don't have to worry about it, even though there's like 20 guys behind them still.
He made it sound like the battle was over.
Yeah, oh, no one's behind us. And I'm like, dude, there's like 10 guys on motorcycles and cars or more. What are you talking about? Other than that little weird thing, lots of great stuff. Max finally getting to use that shotgun and killing some people, pulling out, bam, good stuff. Like it a lot. Wish there was more. I do think what is here is pretty high quality, pretty gnarly, especially for the 80s. The stunt work is incredible. The stuff that those stuntmen had to go through to achieve the result of flying off these cars is super, super great. Tons of injuries. People almost died. But I do think that the hard effort was worth the result.
I have a score in mind for this, and I'm going to have to do some explaining on this already.
Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
He's going to tank it.
Think about how we talked about Conan and how we rated action pretty good, if I remember correctly. That's because compared to now, I think Conan has good action scenes compared to modern sword fights. I think the action scenes in Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, are rather dated, and there's a lot better things that we can do now. First of all, like you said, there's not a lot of them. The movie really suffers from not having a lot of action going on throughout it.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, though. I think it holds up relatively well today. I think it holds up just as good as Conan does. What else could they have done?
I don't know what more they could have done. I think modern chase scenes are more kinetic. They don't have people moving around as awkwardly.
I'll disagree with that a little bit. I do agree on the one hand that there are better car chase scenes now. Sometimes. There is a lot of completely garbage car scenes now.
Also true.
That are just really bad.
Way worse than this.
That are very common. That I would say that Mad Max 2 still surpasses, and it's really old. There are really good ones out there. When it comes to just having truckloads of cars, that doesn't make any sense now that I think about that analogy. But just having this
a lot of cars.
Assortment of weird vehicles, everything from like police cars and
all the cars are also were made in mind of the characters. Fun fact.
Oh, really? Well, that's cool. That's attention to detail. I just think that gets competitive with a lot of the newer stuff, but the best of the new stuff for sure. But even Conan, the best of the new stuff, it wouldn't hold up with as well. But I agree with you. It has dated. There are some parts that look bad. There's some weird editing choices with the way that they cut certain sequences together. A lot of continuity errors and mistakes where things are just like, where did that come from? That's my real critique. If I feel like editing hinders the action, I will put it in action sequences and in choreography. Here, I do think it hinders it to a substantial enough margin that I will be docking points. But the actual shots themselves, the way that cars move, the way that they jump onto the cars, the way that people fly off the cars, like I said, with modern movies, they don't do the same things with stuntmen like they used to. That gives this movie a very tangible, gripping feel, and I'm going to be giving it a lot of points for that as well. Let's move on to Escape from New York. This movie barely has any action. It's moving along. It's a little more investing in the narrative segment for whatever reason, but is not a lot of action. My favorite action scene, and maybe even my favorite scene in the movie, though, is when there's all those bad guys popping out of the floor.
Yeah.
You see John Carpenter's horror roots taken over just a little bit. He's trying to climb the building, shooting people down. That, to me, is the best action scene in the movie, bar none, because it's one of the only scenes that has real engrossing tension as well, where I'm like, oh dang, he's gonna have to get out of this, like him getting through the window, people trying to grab at him. I'm like, ooh, this is nice. Yeah. Outside of that, the fight scene with the spiked bats and the trash can, visually cool, execution very clunky. We're back to Predator smacking around Arnold territory.
A little bit, yeah.
One of my major problems with the action is clearly they wanted to kill off the main crew, but they did it all in like 5 seconds. I'm fine with them all dying, but I think it would have been better if they gradually died off in different action sequences, and that would also allow for more action.
Yeah, it's a little cheap to do that, but at the same time, I think the intention is to add a lot of weight to what's happening. It's a very desperate situation to make the final stretch out, and at least it happens for in-character reasons. With the cabbie, not so much. It's the brain died to his arrogance and his analytical thinking of he wanted to follow the map.
And a girl died for her loyalty.
Exactly. It doesn't add to her character that she's as simple as a main squeeze for the brain, but at least then her ends befit the character.
It's just kind of lame that the majority of the characters die off in the same location. Oh, wait, I do want to say this adds to Snake's character. The scene where he is going down into the theater and he starts like beating people up. It's a quick moment, but I think it's one of the better executed moments of Snake just actually being legitimately cool. Outside of that, though, there's just not a whole lot in this movie, and what there is, outside of that one scene that I really like, isn't really that good. Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2.
I'm going to give an 11.5 for action out of 15. Really like the action when there was action, but this could have gotten 2 points higher at least if there's just more.
I am going to give Mad Max 2 The Road Warrior an 11 out of 15. I think what's there is good. Not enough of it.
I will give Mad Max 2 a 9 out of 15 for the similar reasons, except I was just less impressed with some of it. Bear in mind, 7.5 is like the average out of 15. It's still good, but I needed a lot more to be invested.
I got Escape from New York's action at a 7 out of 15. Wasn't much of it, and the stuff there was of it was average at best.
I'm going to give Escape from New York a 7 out of 15 for action. This is slightly below average. It would have been way lower if it was not for that one action scene that was brief, but really, really well done.
I will give Escape from New York an 8 out of 15 on action sequences. It needed a few more, but to its credit, I like that there was a variety of action set pieces. Each action scene was very different in its own way.
For round 4, we have cinematography, special effects, and production design, and it can earn up to 10 points from each of us. This, my friends, is the Mad Max category. Not as much as it was the Top Gun category, but it's still the one that I think Mad Max does the best. Why? Because cinematography, production design, and special effects is what makes this movie as memorable as it is. It's what creates that atmosphere. It's what creates that world. It's what makes this movie breathe, come to life. It adds the flavor.
It really gives the Australian wasteland vibes.
Those poor people who live in Australia to this very day.
Poor Anakin Skywalker, if he watches this movie. It is so sandy. This is a sandy, sandy movie. And I love it. The dune, it's great. The settlement looks awesome. The flamethrowers, the tires everywhere, the cars, the different types of cars, the costumes.
Costumes went hard.
This movie's got great shots when there's those far shots where you see like 20 vehicles chasing down one vehicle. Super awesome. Issues, the framing could be a little bit better. As I mentioned in the action category, the editing has issues at times when things get pretty hectic. A lot of continuity issues, which is funny because it was filmed in chronological order, which is an interesting tidbit. Movies don't usually do that, for those who don't know. I think the color grading could also just be a little bit better. Other than just like a couple of issues there with the cinematography, special effects, production design, Really solid. Really, really, really good stuff.
Oh, I want to mention something. The explosions in Mad Max 2 are really, really nice. They exploded the settlement and it was very, very beautiful.
I mean, yeah, I agree. The explosions did look good. There weren't a lot of them, but that's a good thing, actually, because you don't want constant explosions like a Michael Bay movie. You want that to have a lot of weight to it.
Yeah, more impact.
But otherwise, I mean, for cinematography, it was fine. There were some good shots that were just cool to see. I just didn't think they were particularly amazing work or very clever, but it was good stuff.
I also agree with you a little bit on the cinematography. Not like blowing me away. Like I put that mostly on framing. Like I said, it's not Top Gun, which I think was top notch all the way around. I'm sorry, please don't look at me like that. I do think that The Road Warrior is a good looking movie at the end of the day.
It's time to escape from New York.
It's time to escape, baby.
Escape from New York, I think, does a lot for its set design. I think the reason it's more impressive is, to be fair, you need to be more impressive in a futuristic setting than either a post-apocalyptic or a fantasy one. Well, fantasy can be hard to do nowadays, but either way, the way they changed New York to be a post-apocalyptic setting, it was a very nice twist on it, and what I especially like is the outside world is also very different every time we see it. They have new technology. They didn't frame it in a way that they were afraid to show any of it. It was a very focused movie, showing you what you needed to see. I think there were especially good shots of the movie, and the way that the camera, especially early on, frames Snake Pliskin. It makes him look cool.
He's so cool.
Whether he is cool or not.
I 100% agree with you. The production design, similarly to Mad Max, is what makes this movie work so well. It's what helps you buy into that world. Instead of regurgitating, I'll just give a little bit of behind the scenes stuff that I think is cool about it. Is they only shoot one shot in New York, and that's when they film the going from the Statue of Liberty, and then they do like a fade away into like this base, but they make it look seamless. That was shot in LA. Most of the shooting was in St. Louis and stuff, and a neighborhood had just burnt down or something, and they asked if they could film there so things would look more apocalyptic. The way that they were basically able to have this crashed plane on the ground, exploring that. The design on these criminals that look dirty, they haven't showered in probably a really, really long time. They developed new Panasonic cameras, I believe, for this movie, so that it could intake as much light as possible, which was a dream for night shooting. You could see more of what's going on. Funnily enough, I think the director, George Miller of Mad Max 2, specifically said, I wish I had the cameras that they had in Escape from New York for my Mad Max 2 movie, which is just a funny little connection between the two. Even though it's in St. Louis, I wasn't like, hey, wait a second, that's not New York. It's only in my brain, like knowing there's no way that this low budget film could be shot in New York because it'd be way too expensive. The world building, the set design, whatever you want to call it, really immersed me in this world. I also agree with you. I think the framing is better in Escape from New York. However, what is not better is the special effects, unfortunately. This is the fakest looking plane ever. Looked horrible. Totally garbage.
I knew you'd bring up the plane as if the special effects and the rest of it are not perfectly fine.
I can agree with that. It is something that is noticeable. And I will say, though, for a low-budget 1981 movie, it's okay. I give it a little bit of a pass. I guess for other complaints, I thought the lighting could have been a little better in some shots. Other than that, though, these are relatively minor complaints. Let's get into scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
So for Mad Max 2, Road Warrior, I'm going to be rating it an 8 out of 10 for cinematography and effects. Really good.
I'm going to give Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, an 8 out of 10. A very ambitious project. I'm very impressed with the scope that they're able to pull off. All of the vehicles, all of the sets, just everything I think is really top notch. I will say sometimes the framing's not very great. When they speed up the camera, sometimes it doesn't look very good.
For cinematography and special effects on Mad Max 2, we'll give it a 7 out of 10. I was thinking lower, but I can't find that much to complain about. I just think some shots could be better, and some production design could have been elevated a little bit.
Now let's score Escape from New York. I'm giving it an 8.5. I think it was maybe slightly better, overall. Though this could have gotten a 9 if it weren't for that one plane scene. I didn't want to dock more than half a point for it though, since it wasn't very long.
I'm going to give Escape from New York an 8 out of 10. Similarly to The Road Warrior, I think that the set design, the production, everything going in with that is really what makes this movie breathe. It adds flavor for completely different reasons. Things docking points is sometimes the lighting was a bit off, sometimes the framing was a bit off, and of course we have the bad special effects, which are brief, so it wouldn't bring it down that much at all.
We gave Escape from New York an 8 for all previously stated reasons. I just think really the cinematography and production design invested me in that story.
For this round, we have music and sound design, which can earn up to 5 points.
Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Sound design, I would say average. I don't think it's horrible. I don't think it's great. I think the score, loud and bombastic, fits the movie. Not particularly memorable. Sometimes a little bit too bombastic for its own good. Sound design, 80s crunch. You know I love 80s crunch. Cars, dune flying everywhere. Atmospheric stuff. It's good, not great. That's all I really have to say.
I personally could use a little bit more crunch on the explosions, but everything else is good.
I feel that Mad Max 2 is really soft on sound design and goes way too hard on music. As they noticed when I was watching it, it was, you heard it, there's songs where it's just one note playing over and over again, and it was noticeable enough that it was jarring for me. And otherwise, I didn't think of any particularly great songs. There were times when maybe music could be used to help portray this barren landscape and post-apocalyptic setting, and in that way I just feel that this is pretty lacking in this category, and sometimes when it does use music it was too jarring.
Escape from New York, once again, John Carpenter is just the man, the myth, the legend, does everything apparently. He scored the movie. I find that very admirable. I also really like John Carpenter's scores. I like them a lot. I like listening to them. They're fun. I love the synthesizers. Catchy. I can still recall the themes in my head.
John Carpenter plays the piano one finger at a time.
He does.
Boom, 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 boom. The score's primitive at the end of the day, but I'll say this. If you recall our RoboCop versus Terminator episode, I ended up giving the score to Terminator over RoboCop. Not because RoboCop's score is bad, in fact it was by Basil Podoros, the same guy who did the Conan score, which I also really liked. But I gave it to Terminator because, while it's a primitive synth score, it's very oppressive, it's very catchy, you can still hear the notes in my head, and it fits the movie very well. I can say similar things to a lesser extent about John Carpenter's score for the movie. It creates a vibe. I think that it adds to the atmosphere of the movie. I think that the theme is good. There's one track that's a little more upbeat that I also remember that I liked a lot. Overall, I think it's a decent enough soundtrack that I'd like listening to. Does make the movie feel low budget. Sound design, similar to what I have to say about The Road Warrior, I think is relatively average. I think the atmospheric sound is good. I think that the sound effects are good. Pretty solid stuff.
Yeah, I agree. You did make me remember that it's not a particularly deep score, but I think it's in a particularly effective score because its energy is paced with the scenes very well. That was my main problem with Mad Max 2, is that it was a little too jarring, but I think what Escape from New York score does is invests you in the world with its style and the instruments it uses, and then we noticed it because we were scoring it, but I don't think it's something that takes you out of the experience at all. So it was good in that way, and it lays back when it needs to in softer scenes, and then it picks up later in higher intensity scenes. I actually liked the sound design. There were a couple of specific sounds that I liked. It makes a new gun for this movie, and I liked the special effects on that, and then I liked how it sounded and everything, and I thought it was pretty conducive.
Let's get into scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
For Mad Max 2, I have it as a 1.5 out of 5. The sound was pretty weak for me. The music wasn't special. The sound effects were kind of dull. I wish for a little bit more, but it was okay-ish.
I'm going to give Mad Max 2 The Road Warrior a 2.5 out of 5. I'm a little bit more generous to the soundtrack and sound effects than you guys. I thought the sound effects were fine. I thought the music was fine. I agree with Kyle. It's a little loud at times, but when the action is actually hectic, I think it fits the movie well.
I will give Mad Max 2 The Road Warrior a 2 out of 5 on music and sound design. And to clarify, it's not just that the music is loud, it's that it's really bombastic, and then when it's that in your face about it, it makes you pay more attention to it, and then it makes you realize this isn't actually that good.
So for Escape from New York, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 for sound design. I thought it was probably slightly better than average, but nothing too special.
I am giving Escape from New York a 3. Love John Carpenter's soundtrack. Primitive, but catchy. Sound effects were good, solid, slightly above average.
I'm giving City Escape a 3 out of 5 on music and sound design because stop laughing at me. It's good. That's why.
For our final round, we have themes.
The strongest category for these movies.
Oh,
absolutely.
For sure. Themes and motifs. It can earn up to 5 points from each of us.
This influenced history in the world for years to come.
You know it,
both
baby.
of these movies.
On impact, if that was part of this, Mad Max 2 would be getting a lot of points. It's not, but I still think that there's some interesting things that you could say about Mad Max 2. A lot of it's more world building wise, but I just think it's showing when things get hard, humanity sort of reverts to its more feral nature, I think is an interesting idea. And I think the movie plays with that pretty well. It has the archetype, as the Fob said, in characters where it focuses on this sort of lone character, like you'd see in a Western that wanders into a town but is outside of civilization and at the end of the day has to leave once he's done his job. I don't think that's executed as well as in a lot of these Westerns, but it's still present. And because it's so sandy, I do think it also adds to the Western flair of this movie. The contrast between the so-called civilized people and their settlement and these sort of animalistic bandits, the line's a lot more blurred than you'd initially think, even though I thought it was kind of a weak comparison. Lord Humongous and Papagallo aren't that different. The idea that Max is just this wanderer who just aimlessly goes throughout the road, just trying to live from day to day, which gives you a sense of just the survivalist instinct of humanity as well, even when things get tough. And I think that going back to the sort of feral nature of humanity, reverting to animalistic ways, I think a good scene to illustrate that is when they derail that car, they just rape the woman, just violently hurt the people, and then leave them there to die. I think that's a great scene that showcases that, and it hurts to watch. I appreciate that they didn't over-sexualize that scene like they sometimes do. It was just a very grounded take on looking at what's happening there. And also just the fact that Max didn't rush to save him because he's like, I don't care, because I'm just trying to save my own skin.
Well, I think you guys convinced me that well enough that it fulfills the theme of survival in the post-apocalyptic world fairly well. And otherwise, I think just other themes that either didn't fully complete them or it just was very sporadic. I just think by the end of the movie, in terms of what it has to say, it felt pretty empty. And then that can kind of slow down the pace and really halt my enjoyment of it if I'm not invested in what's happening, if I don't really care that much.
I wouldn't say it's just the most thematically dense movie in this tournament bracket,
Certainly
but
not.
I do think it has cool ideas that it toys with that do make it a little bit more interesting to me than the average flick.
So kind of what George Miller had in mind a little bit with he was going to make, like you said, Goose into Humongous, right?
Yeah.
So that was the initial idea, and it still kind of translates over, but the idea is that basically anybody can be corrupted. Anybody can go, if there's enough pressure, your mind can go crazy. Corrupted, feral, because in the brink of like conflict and pain, at the end of the day, you might not.
It's impossible to predict how we as humans would react to a dystopian future like this, and I think that's a fair.
And I think what he's trying to portray is that in this dystopian future like this, there's probably a lot of good people that would turn into these evil bandits.
Yeah, and I think that, well, I can't give it credit for something that the movie didn't do with Goose. I think
the ideas.
I agree with you. The ideas are still there, and you can see that. I think that's well portrayed in the design of the bandits, the costume design, how there's just an assortment of different cars. Like a police car, for example, is driving with the bandits. I think that does say a lot about things. I think it's still present. It would have been more present if Goose was actually Lord Humongous, but it's fine. It's okay. You know, we don't need that in life. It's okay. Escape from New York, similarly to Mad Max 2, I don't consider it super thematically dense, but there are some interesting ideas that the movie plays around with. I mentioned how Donald Pleasance plays a buffoon of a president, and the main character sort of doesn't like the establishment, the government. This movie does sort of poke ideas of the government is just incompetent in a lot of ways. Not only did the president somehow end up in this maximum security prison, Manhattan itself is a prison because crime's gotten so out of control, which also showcases, once again, the incompetency of the government. I think that, to me, is the most prevailing idea, the most prevailing through line through the movie.
This podcast is going to go on a list, man.
Yeah, I feel like there's also kind of like an anti-war theme a bit, which mainly sprouts from the end of the movie where he tore up the tape because it could have led to like a nuclear war or like some super weapon.
Yeah.
That's probably why he ended up destroying it.
Another thing, that just the decay of these cities, if you go around to a lot of cities in America right now, they don't look too different. and I think that that's kind of a scary thing, where this movie is a little bit ahead of its time because it just shows the cities overrun by crime, what they can look like. And once again, that's due to the incompetency of the government. I think that's the prevailing thing. And there's a couple of things that dovetail off of that. Not super thematically rich, but I just think that it is a cool idea that does make the movie a little bit more enjoyable.
I agree with all of this.
Let's get to scoring. We're going to start with Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior.
For Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, themes and motifs, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. I definitely think they're a little stronger than average. Could have been a 4, but I'm not sure.
I'm going to give Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, a 3. I think there's some good themes. Like Kyle said, I don't think it fully realizes all of them. Not that it needed to, but I think it did enough to make it above average for me.
For me, The Road Warrior gets a 2 out of 5 on themes and motifs. We're having one theme that was mostly solid and other ones that there's an inkling of it that exists and the movie doesn't help those themes play out.
So for Escape from New York, themes and motifs, I'm giving it a 2.5. While there was something there, for the most part, being pretty weak. The main thing was rescuing the president. Didn't seem to be too many underlying themes under that. I'm
giving Escape from New York a 3. Honestly, I'm more with the thought that might be a 2.5, but I hate the government, so I'm gonna give it a 3.
Now we're definitely on the list.
We're cooked.
I will give Escape from New York a 2 out of 5 on themes and motifs. Pretty much what I said about Mad Max 2. Has one good theme, the other ones aren't really there.
Let's get to final scoring. We have done the math fob. Share your scores for Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, and Escape from New York.
For Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, I have 32.5 out of 50. And for Escape from New York, I have 31.5 out of 50.
For Mad Max 2, I have 33.5 out of 50. And from Escape from New York, I have 30.5 out of 50.
For Mad Max, I have 27 out of 50, and for Escape from New York, I have 31 out of 50.
And for those keeping track at home, you would know that we have a tie for the first time in Film Fights history, unless you were actually paying attention at home, in which you would know one of our co-hosts did not calculate his numbers correctly, meaning that the real score is 94 out of 150 for Mad Max 2, and 92 out of 150 for Escape from New York. So your winner today is Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Very close, neck and neck. None of us loved these movies, but we liked them both. Kyle seemed to dislike Mad Max 2, though, significantly more. Our light just died.
I'm just gonna live in darkness. Kyle's gonna be sad over there because my new favorite movie lost.
If you made it to the end of this video, you must like our channel, so why don't you subscribe and comment down below which one of these movies did you like more. And if you want to check out our last episode that we did, you can check out Conan the Barbarian versus Highlander right up there. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you later.